much. Yeah, thank you for joining. I look forward to spending the next 50 minutes or so with you. Thank you for taking the time out to come hear what we're doing with self-checkout. So like Angel said, today I'm going to talk about why self-checkout, why is it important to you as a grocer, your customers that come into your stores. And then the following month, next month, we'll cover best practices and I'll explain a little bit what that is later. So a little quick intro. I've been between Toshiba and IBM roughly about 40 years now. And the exciting part about my role is I get to work with retailers like yourself coast to coast here in the US, talking about self-service, talking about point of sale. I kind of do it all, but I kind of have an expertise in the world of self-service. So today I'm going to cover a lot of detail. The information I'm going to cover with you in these charts, Angel will make them available to you, so you'll have them. This is really kind of step one, getting some information. I think I'm going to answer many of your questions as we go through this, but obviously if you have more questions towards the end, we'll be able to answer some of those as well. Since I talk with my hands, I am going to come off video so you guys can focus on the slides. So let's kind of dive in. Hopefully you can see my agenda slide here. So we're going to talk about, who Toshiba is. There's several people on the call today. Those of you that have Toshiba gear today or IBM gear back in the past, thank you for your business. We appreciate it. So I am going to spend a couple minutes on who we are, why we think what we do works very well in the retail space. We're going to cover industry trends. Where are things going, both good and bad? We'll cover them both. Remove friction from the front end, right? Nobody likes to wait in line. So how do you alleviate that with your shoppers that come into your store? Obviously, we're going to talk about self-service solutions. That's why we're here today. But you can't talk about self-service without talking about shrink and loss prevention. You can't talk about self-service without talking about the shopping experience. They kind of go hand in hand. And then we'll spend a little bit of time on the back office system server. So that's the system that kind of keeps it all together. And then we'll cover managed services and then a quick summary. So who are we? So back in what was it, 2012, IBM decided to divest one of their brands, which was our retail sales solution brand. They were getting out of a lot of different areas of business, as you know, PC laptops, Intel-based servers, printing systems, and Toshiba was looking to expand. So back in 2012, IBM sold our group, which was at the time about 2,000 of us came over from IBM into Toshiba. There's two Toshiba organizations here in the United States under a company called Toshiba Tech. One of them is Toshiba Global Commerce Solutions. That's who we are. We're the retail group. And then there's Toshiba America's Business Solutions, which is more of your printing systems, some consumer types, things like that. They're based out of California. So those are the two divisions. We're sister companies. We're wholly owned subsidiary of Toshiba. So we're based right outside of Raleigh, North Carolina in Durham. Right now, there's about 3,000 of us worldwide that work within TGCS. Again, Toshiba Global Commerce Solutions. Rance Polar is our CEO. But the cool thing is, just like under IBM, right, we're very innovative on what we do. So everything came over from IBM. Hardware, software, intellectual property, all the patents. Several of the employees came over both on the services side, the development side, and the sales side. We have several development centers across the world, as you can see on this chart here on the bottom left-hand side. So we do, again, worldwide development, and we continue to lead in the industry. We've been leaders in retail for over 40 years. We do business in 120 countries. We operate globally. And again, we have over 3 million POS systems installed today live. So I like to tell you that for one reason. If you ever go into a store today and you still see an IBM logo, whether it's on a self-checkout, a monitor, a POS system. Again, we were divested in 2012. That's over 13 years ago when you look at it, right? Close to 13 years. And that system was probably installed several years before that. So it kind of goes to show the longevity of our system. These are some of the larger businesses that we do business with today. You probably recognize a lot of the logos on this chart, right? We're in 60% of the top 25 worldwide retailers. So, the same systems that Costco is running or Walmart or Dollar General or Kroger or, Albertsons Safeway is the same systems that STCR is talking to you about today. So again, we got a pretty good track record. Number one in retail, as you can see, as far as point of sale systems. Since I'm a grocery guy, I only focus in the grocery segment. I love the bottom bullet on this chart. 9 out of the top 10 US grocers use our point of sale systems today. So you're in pretty good company when it looks to that. But it's more than just the hardware. From a company perspective, we have obviously hardware systems, we have software platforms, loyalty promotions, we have a complete services portfolio, both in-store and professional services. But you know what? You can't be number one unless you're building a really rock solid solution. And that's where technology comes into play. Unlike some of our competitors that take a PC from a desktop, from an office, slap some powered USB ports into it and call it a point of sale system, we know that's not the case. It wasn't built for that. So we're very selective on how we build our point of sale systems and our self-checkout systems. We want to make sure they're robust and they're going to last for a very long time. And by doing that, you can see some of the bullets on this chart. We're part of Intel's embedded roadmap. We're looking to give you the best value for the money. And with that comes a lot of retail hardening. So if you ever come to North Carolina, I'd love to take you for a tour of our super lab, where we actually do a lot of the retail hardening testing and things like that to make sure that, when that POS system lands in your store and somebody's, banging it with a cart, spilling coffee on it, cleaning it with crazy types of liquids that you see in the store, it's going to last, for quite some time. And that's kind of what we do to our systems. And we can actually show you that in the labs. I got two more charts on who we are, but I like to play this little short video. If you go to this link, when you get these charts, there's different videos that cover both liquid, chemical, dust, lint, things like that. But it just kind of shows you what we do to our systems to make sure you're going to get your bang for the buck on them.
We are always trying to up our game here at Green Market Grocery, which is why we couldn't wait to roll out our latest and greatest concept, curbside checkout. And that's why we decided to stick with curbside pickup. Toshiba knows in retail, not every idea holds water. That's why they test their systems rigorously to make sure a small splash doesn't turn into a tidal wave of problems. Because if your Toshiba systems can work here, they can work just about anywhere.
So that just kind of gives you a taste of what we do. And here's kind of my last advertising chart. You can see across the left-hand side, these are some of the operating systems that we support from a portfolio perspective. So our TCX Sky is our Linux embedded operating system. It's proprietary to us, built for retail. And that's what most of the large chains run today. And then obviously we support, generic Linux, Windows, and Android. And then this is kind of a lineup of our different hardware solutions, be it point of sale, self-checkout, or peripherals. So you kind of got a pretty big lineup there. But let's talk about industry trends. What's going on in the world of retail? So what's causing change, right? Why is self-checkout still exploding like it's been for several years now? Well, we know that labor rates continue to drive change. Supermarket News this month basically just said industry pay within grocery is trickling up, right? We know that several states are already well over $15 an hour. If you're in the Northeast, you're probably already experiencing that, or the same thing with California. So, historically, labor rates drive a lot of change within our industry. We've seen post-COVID, right, the Great Recession. So people that are working for you now are looking for alternative employment elsewhere. They know that they can probably go somewhere else and make 20% more than what they're making in your store. I don't think I really have to tell you this. You got big chains like Target, right? They're starting people at roughly, $24 an hour, right? Every single day we turn around. And if you look at the latest Lampert report, he said, the number one issue for most grocery CEOs is you can't find labor. And I love this chart right here. I used to show this all the time, right? Why is self-checkout growing, right? We know that millennials prefer to use them. People would rather use them than waiting in line. We know labor rates are driving people to use self-checkouts. But you know what the number one reason is today? You can't find labor. You just can't find it. And when you find it, you're trying to figure out how do you retain it within your store. But we also know this, right? 94% of grocers today are either have implemented self-checkout, are on their way to implement it, or taking a serious look, which leaves about 6% of grocery retailers today that are still on the fence, right? They think, if I do self-checkout, my shrink's going to go through the roof. You know, I don't have the labor to run it. There's a lot of preconceived notions on that, which really just tells me you need a little bit more education on why it works today, and it works very well. These are some of the different companies that we do business with within the world of self-checkout. So these are all customers that have rolled out our System 7 self-checkout or are in the middle of it. You recognize a lot of these logos. A lot of them are national chains, but you know what? Even the independent grocers, right? The grocers that have 1 store, 5 stores, 30 stores, it really doesn't matter the size. Many of these are STCR customers today. These are all people like yourself that have seen self-service in the store. You may have used it, good or bad, and you really like, you know, what you've seen. And these grocers actually went forward and implemented self-service within their stores today and having great success. But before I keep going forward, I want to take a step back real quick and talk about some history, right? We learned from history. And if you remember back in 2011, before Albertsons purchased Safeway, they made an announcement to the world and pretty much said they're removing self-checkout to provide a better shopping experience, right? I think Hy-Vee did the exact same thing. And if you fast forward to 2019, they did a 180, right? They teamed with Toshiba, and now they're installing self-checkouts in all of their stores to provide a better customer experience. So you got to ask yourself, why would a major chain spend millions of dollars on self-service devices for their stores and then turn around, rip it out, and then years later put it back in? It's because it's a philosophy thing, right? It's how you implement the solution that makes the difference. And by following best practices, and they team with us to go do that, now they've realized there is a right way, there is a wrong way. So my message there is, just because you've had bad experiences with self-checkout at a chain doesn't imply that's how it would operate in your chain. You got to decide that to follow best practices to really provide the best service for your shoppers that come in there. And we also know this, right? You know, with COVID, post-COVID right now, you know, there's a lot of challenge. Like, where do I spend my money? Do I do it on, you know, scan and go applications? Do I do it on e-commerce, Instagram, all those crazy things? At the end of the day, we know that when shoppers enter your store, you're going to drive, you know, much more business, right? And 8 out of 10 shoppers would prefer to shop in your stores. So you really got to provide them that good experience. And the way you do that is really removing some of the friction in your store by people waiting in line. So here's kind of the next turn of the crank. If you ask me what's the trend in self-service, it's those early adopters that installed maybe 4 SCOs or 6 SCOs are adding more to the front end, right? They're trying to get to 80% self-checkout throughput on the front end, which is pretty aggressive, right? Some stores are opening with self-checkout as the primary path. If you remember, Walmart did a little announcement. This was probably a year or 2 ago. They're actually dabbling with self-checkout only stores, right? They're going to have hosts monitoring those lanes. Albertsons kind of did the same thing as Walmart did in some stores. There's a Harris Teeter in Charlotte, North Carolina. They went and converted the whole front end to self-checkout only, and they didn't remove any jobs, which is kind of interesting. Like, why would you implement all those self-checkouts in your store and not remove any labor from the front end? Didn't make any sense, but we'll talk a little bit about that. But here's the boomerang effect. Now we see this, right? I think, you know, you've seen this over the last 6 months to a last year, a lot of headline news saying, you know what? Walmart's scrapping self-checkout, Costco's doing it, Wegmans is scrapping self-checkout, you know, shrink is going through the roof because of self-checkout. And basically what happened was this: a lot of these large retailers that went full steam ahead during COVID to implement self-checkout, they went overboard. They went too far. They tried to get to 80% of self-checkouts in the front end versus POS. And it backfired on them because A, they didn't staff them correctly. B, they probably didn't use best practices. And C, shrink went through the roof. And this really caused the following thing, right? Target is now limiting some of their stores to only 10 items or less. This one really cracked me up about Dollar General. They're looking to remove self-checkout from the store. I'm not sure if you've been into a Dollar General lately, but every time I go into one, I kind of laugh at their implementation, only because they have 1 or 2 self-checkouts on the front end. They're never staffed. They're kind of a self-checkout. They're more of a glorified kiosk. And at the end of the day, if you don't follow best practices when it comes to self-checkout, you're going to have shrink. I'll guarantee you that as a fact, right? So these are some of the mistakes that the early adopters in the world of self-service made. So the real question is, how can you be successful? Well, the way you can be successful is not duplicate some of the mistakes that some of them made. So let's talk about, how do you remove that frustration and friction from the front end? So the first thing self-checkout's going to do is really give your shoppers choices and control. I love it when retailers say, you know what, Paul, our shoppers, we have different shoppers. We're different. We're all about customer service. Well, I like to say, you know what, if you're all about customer service, have you asked your shoppers if they would like self-checkout in your stores? Or you probably haven't done a survey yet, because if you did, you'd be pretty surprised at the results of that. And number one is by giving shoppers choice and control, they're going to choose whether they want to use self-service or not versus being forced to use point of sale checkout, right? You're going to give them a private checkout experience. Maybe there's personal hygiene item things that they want to buy. They don't want to go talk to a cashier, right? And how about when you get slammed on the front end and you're not fully staffed? What do you do as a retailer? You basically go pull resources from other areas of the store, take them away from their current roles and responsibilities to go bail out the front end, right? So by doing self-checkout, you're able to smooth out that spike on the front end. You'll be able to reduce the queue times of the shoppers, right, without increasing your labor cost. And then if you want to put the icing on the cake, the labor that you're going to save by doing self-service, if you can do like Harris Teeter did here in Charlotte and redeploy the labor to other areas of your store, you're going to drive higher sales. And that's the punchline. That's what you're trying to do. So if you look at some of these stats, right, by redeploying your labor, here's what happens. So we know that 50% of the shoppers come into your store, they don't know everything they want to buy, right? 93% can't find an associate in the aisle to help them. If they got help in the aisle, 85% would buy more and 90% would return to your store, right? So we know that, out of the 50%, 93 can't find an associate. 90% of shoppers would leave without buying anything. I think that's really the last thing you want to have happen. But we also know that if they got the help, right, 80% of the retailers reported that they've seen an increase in basket size from 20 to 50% per transaction if that shopper got help. So what you're trying to do is this, right? You got your value chain, you got rising labor cost, right? You can't find the labor. If you can redeploy what little labor you do have to other areas of your store to help with the operation part of it and the customer satisfaction part of it, you're going to improve the shopping experience for the shopper. You're going to improve loyalty and improve wallet share, obviously, which increases revenue and customer satisfaction. And that's the ultimate goal that you want to accomplish when you implement self-checkout the right way. And why do we say it's faster? Well, I want you to think about something. You're a shopper and you're on the left-hand side of this chart, right? You got one-to-one queuing. You got one point of sale lane, one cashier. You got one shopper in front. And that shopper can't move until the one before them pays, right? In the world of self-checkout, you got 1 to 4 queuing, right? You got one line going in, 4 ways to get out. And if you're doing proper queue management, the line actually looks like it's moving faster, right? Same thing if you had 6 self-checkouts. So picture yourself at a red light. If you have 2 lanes going into a red light versus 6, you're probably going to have more throughput with the 6, right? And that's kind of the way you look at it from self-checkout. You got more ways to get out. So the perception for the shopper is you're moving faster through the line. So you're not just standing there waiting for the person with 50 items in front of you. And that's why a lot of shoppers prefer to use self-service, is because it appears to be faster to them. Am I suggesting you go the big bang approach and do all stores if you have multiple stores in one shop? Absolutely not. We'd love you to do that, but you're probably not going to do that. You want to do one pilot store. You want to dip your toe in the water and see, okay, is self-checkout for me? Is it for my store, my associates, my shoppers? I don't know that. So if you just kind of team up with STCR, figure out, okay, what is the best format? What is the best location for the lanes in your front end? And you do a pilot store, you look at the results, you do best practices, and if it works great, you move on to the right-hand side of the chart. That's kind of what Wegmans did many years ago. They were all about customer service. They refused to do any self-checkouts in their stores. They decided to listen to us, and they installed a couple of them in the prepared food areas. They had great success, and now they're in full store transformation. I live right in Wake Forest, North Carolina. We have a Wegmans that opened up a couple miles down the road. And today, I think there are probably 50% self-checkouts on the front end and 50% point of sale, and just having great results. So again, it all depends on how you implement it, but if you follow those best practices, you're gonna get great results. So let's talk about our System 7. So our System 7 is our 4th generation of self-checkout. I'm going to show this quick 2-minute video, which will give you a quick overview of the system, and then I'll come back and explain a little bit more about what the video covered. right, that kind of gives you an idea of what our System 7 is all about. So when we ventured off to go design System 7, we talked to our retailers, talked to our business partners to really figure out, okay, what can we improve over prior generations? And they pretty much said, you know what, we need something that's very modern for our stores, something's a little lower to the ground, and something that looks, attractive to the customer, right? So this is what we developed. And the neat thing about System 7 is we try to use as many point of sale components in our self-checkout that we could. So it's the same touchscreen we use for point of sale, the same printer, the same system unit inside the lane. Again, for serviceability, it keeps it consistent. And it also keeps it obviously very retail hardened. So when you buy the self-checkout, it comes with all the necessary self-checkout software with it. It comes with all necessary hardware, obviously, and then the integration tools that obviously we need to support that system. There's really 4 different lines of self-service devices that we offer. I'm only going to focus on the 2 on the right. The other 2 on the left are also available, and STCR can kind of give you more information on those if you're interested in those. But we're going to focus on this screen, right? There's a lot of self-checkout models. This is obviously not all of them. This just kind of gives you a quick idea. So let me summarize it for you. The only difference between the ones on the top and the ones on the bottom are the ones on the top accept cash and the ones on the bottom do not, right? They're card only. And the other differences is the number of bagging station racks that you have on the self-checkout. So you got small, medium, large, and so on. So it all depends on what you're trying to solve for. And that's why you need to get with STCR and really figure out, okay, are you trying to handle more express orders at the front end, large orders? And based on that, it'll determine which model will fit your front end the best. Obviously, the most common one that we see with most of our grocers that are in the independent grocer space is a large. That will fit up to 3 bag racks. It'll fit reusable bags, paper bags. It's kind of a sweet spot. I would always avoid a small or a medium, and we can discuss later on why that is later on. But that's just kind of my recommendation. And again, we can do that as we kind of go through the process. But to talk about the software is extremely important. And the neat thing about the software is our self-checkout system looks identical to a point of sale system on the back end. So your end of day reporting, it all looks identical. There's no different. There's no separate reconciliation. Basically, the self-checkout doesn't have any history of pricing, item descriptions, any of that information. That's all stored in the point of sale. So when you're running self-checkout, it's actually running part of your point of sale application inside the self-checkout unit. It's handling all of the point of sale business logic, so you don't have to worry about any of that. That's already done. So at the end of the day, again, you have one set of pricing files, one set of item files. You don't have to worry about keeping those in sync with the self-checkout. So that none of that is an issue. The software that runs on the self-checkout is called Check. And really, what's its purpose, right? Its purpose is to not let you get stuck, right? How many times have you been using self-checkout today and you get stuck at the lane, then you're looking for a shopper system to come help you? So our goal is really to minimize the friction. And the way we do that is we stack up interventions. So let's say you're scanning at the lane and something occurs. Our goal is to let you keep going, hoping that you're going to resolve the issue before you hit the tender button. So maybe you scan a bottle of wine, which is age restricted. Maybe you scan an item and the weight doesn't match what it should. It's going to tell you, it's going to complain, but it will let you keep going, and hopefully you'll clear that error. So again, we try to minimize those interventions as much as possible. And to do that, we have some patented algorithms. So when you get your lanes, it doesn't know the weight of any product in your entire store. So as the shoppers begin to shop, it's going to learn the weight of every product barcode in there. And once it has 10 good scans of a particular product, it's going to lock that weight range within the database. So when the shopper comes in and scans that item again with the same UPC, if it's outside of the weight range, it's going to cause a weight intervention error, right? You've probably seen that before. But, our system is smart enough to know that, the shopper can actually cause some of these errors themselves, right? Maybe they put their purse or umbrella in the bagging area. Maybe they have one of their kids with them playing in the bagging area, causing the weight in that security scale to kind of get off kilter, right? So what we do is, if something does occur, maybe they put their umbrella in the bagging area, we'll let them know, please remove unscanned item, but we'll let them keep scanning. So as long as that settles down before they hit the tender button, i.e. they remove the umbrella from the bagging area, it's not going to complain. It's not going to stop the lane. So again, we're allowing the shopper to correct their own mistakes. We keep a complete audit trail of everything that goes on with the different errors that you can go by and look and figure out how to resolve them for the future. If the name of the product's on file, we'll say it. You can even limit how many times a shopper can use the same PLU. So maybe for bananas 4011, they're only allowed to use it one time because we know it's a low cost item, right? We handle special items. So maybe there's bulk items in your store, like cases of water, dog food, and we don't want them putting that into the bagging area, hurting themselves, hurting the equipment. So when they scan those items, you can flag it to say, leave in your cart. Maybe there's optional pass around items like floral or greeting cards. They may or may not put it in the bagging area. Again, you can flag those as optional pass around so they don't have to put them in there and it's not going to cause an intervention. And that's really where this hand scanner comes in. I always recommend adding a hand scanner to the lane so they can scan their bulk items with that scanner and not have to try to lift it out of their cart. That's definitely a really good feature. And if it's plugged into the scanner scale the way it should be, it'll follow the same security protocol as your regular scanner scale will. The neat thing about the check application is the features that it has. So you can run it in full security mode, like we've talked about with weight security and all those good things. You can run it in shopper speed mode, which I don't recommend. That is the case like a Walmart might do or a Target, where they would turn off all security at the lane. So it's kind of a free-for-all for shrink. The only use case I can think of on turning on shopper speed mode would be the case where maybe you're having a hardware issue with the lane, with the security scale, you want to keep it open. You turn off the security scale without anybody knowing until, Toshiba service comes in there and fixes that lane. That would be the only use case as far as I'm concerned. And then there's cashier speed mode. So why would you use that? Let's say it's the day before Thanksgiving, you're slammed on the front end, you want to turn 2 out of your 4 self-checkout lanes into a point of sale lane, and you can do that. So it turns off all security and audio prompts, changes the screen to make them simpler for a cashier to stand in front of the lane and do the scanning and all that. So those are some of your options with check. The LED lighting on the lane is really there welcoming the shopper, right? So as they approach the lane, all the LED lights are on. When they start the transaction, only the LED lights around the components that are at that part of the cycle of the transaction itself. So when it's time to pay, basically the coupon light will turn on when it's time to do the coupon, and then when it's time to pay, all the tendering lights will turn on. The screens, we've tried to simplify the screens as much as possible. So again, we have an area where you can put your logo. We have a scrollable receipt. We have the weight information at the bottom for the scale. We have a message bar at the top telling the shopper what to do next. We have a picture showing them what to do. And then you kind of have your button area where you can add buttons for tendering and looking up items. And then your toolbar at the bottom where you can change the language, change the volume, obviously request help. And then when it's time to enter in a produce item, let's say a PLU item, you can look it up by number, by name, by image. And this is where you'd work with STCR to kind of organize the flip chart to make it simple for the shopper to find the items that they cannot scan in the store. If you're looking to use your own bag, so you can add a reusable bag rack to the bagging area. This is where the shoppers are going to bring in their own bag, or you can offer paper bags as well. So we have software features and hardware features to support both of those. Let's talk about loss prevention, right? Again, I said earlier that you can't talk about, self-service without talking about shrink, right? So loss prevention is extremely important nowadays. We're seeing a lot of that in the news, and we're not sitting back and waiting, right? We've done several things to help you as a retailer combat theft within your stores. And I'll tell you, and I'll guarantee you this, if you follow best practices, you will see your shrink go down at the self-checkout. You'll see your shrink go down in the store by implementing self-checkout if you implement best practices, right? And the reason why I'm saying that is you actually don't have cashiers touching product, and you have all the security features built into the self-checkout. So you actually see your shrink reduced by doing self-checkout if you do it right. So these are some of the things that we've already implemented or are working on. So one of them is produce recognition. We'll talk about that. Bottom of the basket, that is on our roadmap to really detect items that are under the basket. Item identification, we'll talk a little bit about that. And then biometric for age verification. Those are things that we're working on. And with all of the different things that we've done with our new Alaris Security Suite, we've been awarded from Retail Tech Breakthrough Awards as #1 in the country today, right? For this year. So just AI innovation. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that is and what that really means to you as far as what Toshiba has done. And really, it starts with this. So here's your System 7 self-checkout lane. The first thing we want to do is be able to recognize produce. So you put your produce item on the scale, you push a button, it'll recognize it. The next thing we want to do is look at the shopper's behavior, right? What are they doing? What are they scanning? What are their movements in front of the self-checkout lane? We're going to monitor some of those things. We're going to integrate those two cameras together. Long-term, our goal is really to check the bottom of the basket. We're not looking to add an item to the transaction by bottom of the basket, but really recognizing that there is an item under the basket and making the shopper acknowledge that, right? The next thing really is tying those two together with the camera that's pointing into the security scale. So by looking at that security scale, you're going to be able to determine what's in there. That's kind of a roadmap item as well. And then there's a camera that looks at the shopper while they're shopping, right? You've seen that before, and that's an item that we have available also. So let's talk about the first one, which is produce recognition. So why is it important? So think about it, right? You're a shopper, you're pulling up to the self-checkout lane, and you have a bunch of produce in your basket. You're probably not going to want to go to self-checkout because either A, you don't want to go through all those flip chart screens and try to find the picture of the item. Maybe the item doesn't have a PLU, so you can't key it in, right? Or maybe there's errors when you're going to do it, right? They're going to cause problems and not plug in the right thing. So those are some of the things that we're trying to solve for produce recognition. The neat thing about produce recognition is by adopting it in your stores, you're going to see an increase in self-checkout utilization. You're going to really improve the transaction time because now the computer AI technology is seeing what the produce looks like and identifying it a lot quicker than the shoppers hunting for it within the flip charts, right? And you're going to minimize shrink because we have some loss prevention things built into it, which I'll show you that here in a second. So here's how it works. We have an AI camera, we call it an edge cam, on the left-hand side of the self-checkout lane right underneath the screen. Why is it an edge cam? Well, there's several solutions in the market right now that claim to do AI technology, but a lot of them have large servers they're going to put into your store to manage and really crunch a lot of the AI information that the camera's learning, right? All that artificial intelligence. We've opted to build a smart camera that handles all of that on the actual camera, right? So we don't have to go to an external server. We don't have to go to the cloud to identify what that item is. We do it right there at the camera. So the latency and the speed is extremely fast. And the way the process works is you walk up to the lane, you put your produce on the scanner scale, you hit a button that triggers our computer vision and retail vision to go identify the product. We're going to give you a short list of items that look like that product, right? We're going to let the shopper select it, and then you're done. And what we do is we take everything we just learned from that transaction and we send it up to the cloud, right? It's not used to run that transaction. It's used to improve the model. And what happens is there's a model that we host in the cloud that we gather data from all of our retailers that's using the solution. And we download that model 4 times a year into the retailer's environment, which has improved reliability with the products within the database. So every time we send out a new model, it's gotten smarter than the previous model. So it knows what more produce items are. It knows how to shorten the list of items. So again, it's constantly learning and getting smarter as time goes on. So we're taking all that telemetry data that we're collecting during the transaction, and we're letting our data scientists really operate on it to really improve the throughput of that self-checkout. So I'm going to show you a quick video of the produce recognition solution. Again, this is available today. You can get it from STCR for your systems. So the left-hand screen is what is on the self-checkout screen. The bottom right-hand screen is a picture of what the camera sees on the scanner scale, and that's what's going to detect what you're doing. So let their video roll.
Today we're going to show you the Toshiba Produce Recognition Solution. For the demo, we're running a System 7 unit that's running our check software, along with a Toshiba Edge camera that's actually doing the computer vision algorithms on the camera itself. Let's get started. In order to enter produce using self-checkout, again, you indicate that you're entering produce. You put your item on the scale. The system recognizes the item. For items that have both organic and non-organic items, both are shown for the shopper to choose. Here, we'll select our bananas, add them to the cart. The solution also works with bags. So here we have an avocado put in a bag. select produce recognition. The item gets recognized. We add it to our cart. We also recognize items that are in a reusable bag. So here we have oranges. Put them on the scale, request the system to identify them, and it does identify the items. So the other feature of the solution is allowing the shopper to correct their own mistakes that they could have inadvertently made while shopping. So here, we'll put garlic on the scale, allow the system to identify it. Let's assume the shopper says they don't want to use that item, they want to key the PLU in themselves. They inadvertently enter the wrong item number. So what the system will do will show them exactly what the camera observes, the item they entered, and what the system selects as the actual item on the scale. Here, the shopper can easily correct their mistake and enter the correct item. Next, loss prevention in terms of customers that are not making accidental mistakes. In this example, they're trying to purchase a steak for a banana. They put the steak on the scale. Enter the produce. The system does not recognize the item, so the shopper can key in their own item number. So here we're keying in bananas. The system shows what was actually on the scale, the item that the shopper entered, so they know that they've been caught. They can continue down this path and say they want to select the bananas anyway. Once they put the item in the bag, the shopper assistant is called over to be able to address the situation. Once they scan their shopper assistant card, we show the item image of the steak. We show that the shopper entered the banana, so the shopper assistant can void the item at this point in time to continue the transaction. That's Toshiba's produce recognition solution.
All right, hopefully you can see there's some savings there with that. So if you're running our Toshiba ACE point of sale application on the front end point of sale lane, the exact same thing you saw there in that video for self-checkout is also available for the regular point of sale lane as well. Same technology. So the next one I'm going to show you is the overhead. So what is this all about? Really, the overhead solution is a camera that's mounted on top of the transaction awareness light, and it's pointing down onto the scanner scale, and it's got scan zone. So what it's trying to capture is a shopper that is at the lane, and we call it ghost scanning. So what that is maybe they're covering the UPC label with their hand as they're scanning over the scanner scale. So they're kind of going through the motion to fake you out if you're watching, and they're putting the item in the bag. So our objective here with this solution is really to detect those scans that aren't really valid scans. So I'm going to show you a couple videos of this so you kind of get an idea. So if you look at this shopper, these are some proof of concept pictures. Look inside the green box where it says misscan. So if you watch this video, it's pretty evident that this person's really trying to steal. She looks around, nobody's looking, fake scans, puts it in the bagging area, and then you kind of see misscan up in that green box. This next one I think is pretty hilarious. Now, let me explain to you what these are. This is our future use case. So these are not available today like the one I just showed you is. This is something that we're working on in a future use case, hopefully by the end of the year. It'll be the same hardware, same software, just an update to the software. We'd make it available probably at an additional charge. But this is not only looking above the scanner scale, but it's also looking in front of the lane itself. So it's trying to capture from the basket to the bagging area, not even going through the scanner scale. And if you watch the person on the right, this person's kind of going to town, scanning some items. You know what? Let me just take these right from my basket and put them directly into the bag. Forget scanning them all together. You see misscan in that scenario. Let's go to the one on the right. I like the one on the right the best out of all of them. This one, scanning items. You know what? Here's a hat. I like the hat. I'm going to go throw it on my head. I'm not going to scan it. And now you have misscan up in that green box. So again, it's capturing some of these crazy things that shoppers will do to kind of beat the system when it comes to self-service. So again, those two I just showed you just now are future use cases. The previous one where they do the ghost scan, that's available today with the solution. The other option is the personal video monitor. So again, this is a monitor that sits on the actual self-checkout screen itself, showing the shopper as they're shopping on your touch screen. If you want to do an external device, like on the right two pictures, you can do that with an external monitor. Again, that's available today. Again, it's just perception that the shopper is being watched. So again, those are just some of the things that we talk about when we talk about loss prevention, when we go over best practices with you. But again, all those things are good measures to take forward with your store. There's about 16 different things we do to minimize interventions. I'm not going to cover all 16. We've already covered several of them, but you're going to get these charts and you'll be able to read through them. But we've already talked about some of them, so I'm kind of skip some of those. So let's talk about the shopper assistant role, right? What is the shopper assistant's role? The shopper assistant is the person that's with the lanes all the time. They never leave the lanes. They're really there to supervise the operation, watch the traffic going in and out. They have an ID card that they would scan. When there's an intervention, to help that shopper, but their job is really to monitor the lane lights, the transaction awareness lights, the customer's body language, listen to those voice prompts. But the most important thing they can do to reduce your shrink is to greet every shopper that comes in that area. A simple, "Hi, my name is Paul. Let me know if you need any assistance." That is probably the most efficient theft deterrent thing you can put in that area, right? That's not even technology based. It's just being personable. You don't want them hiding behind the podium, which I call a vacation station, checking their Facebook status, right? You want them working with shoppers one-on-one to help them get through the transaction. In the event that there is an intervention, they're going to come and scan their card. They're going to get these screens up there and they're going to do what's necessary to clear that intervention and hopefully educate the consumer on what they did wrong. We do have a mobile operation manager, which is called Mobile Assist. So this is a mobile device where it's as if you were standing in front of the lane. And this is where you can actually go in there and clear those interventions remotely if you needed to from a service counter for an unexpected situation where maybe you don't have the lane staff for that period of time. So you really want to keep an eye on it. There's always discussions about cash versus cashless. So this is something that we can always have the conversation with you about, right? You got to make sure you're looking at individual stores and what the utilization is of your cash versus card only in those stores to make the right decision on what models you want to go with. Here's an example of McKeever's in Kansas City, a great layout. They have 6 lanes in a courtyard environment right in front of customer service. The only thing missing from this picture is one line going in, separated by merchandise racks and some merchandise racks around those lanes. But again, a great install that they did. This is an STCR account in New York City. I love this. They broke every spacing rule that we had when it came to self-checkout, but they were able to cram 11 self-checkout lanes into a very small store in Manhattan to get the throughput. And it's just amazing how customers get in and get out of that store. This is our previous generation of self-checkouts, but they did a phenomenal job with this implementation and it really helped avoid the bottlenecks this store had with people lining up down the aisles. We'll talk a little bit about the back office system server, right? So this is the system that either sits in the store at headquarters, and this is what's going to monitor what's going on with the self-checkout lanes. This is where your weight database resides. This is where your item security sits. This is where your quick item lookup screens are created. Your shopper assistant cards are created. All that is on the back office system server. But you know what? The most important thing about that system is really the reports. So you're going to be able to run reports to find out exactly what every lane is doing, what the utilization rate is of the self-checkout lanes, what the interventions were, right? Cash reports, if you're running cash systems, operational reports. You'll be able to see everything that shopper assistant did when they scanned their card, right? So again, your access to all that data is right there with those reports. As far as managed services go, again, we don't leave you by yourself. Basically, you'll work with STCR for doing the configurations, setting up the environment of the lanes, adding any scanner scales, pin pads to them. You'll have operational training. We'll have train the trainer. We'll have go live support. All those different things are available to you to make sure that you're going to have a good implementation of self-checkout. And when it comes to hardware service, again, you're covered by well over 1,000 Toshiba people out in the field with parts in vans. STCR has been remarketing our hardware services for well over 30 years now. Just a great combination. So we're there to service those lanes as if it was a POS lane. So you don't got to worry about getting stuck in what you're doing. One more chart really is a summary, right? So really, what's the next step? The next step is getting with STCR. Getting your questions answered, figuring out, okay, if I do a pilot store, what do I need to do? What's the layout need to be? Do I do cash? Do I do card? How many do I do? What are the pros and cons? Once you get your lanes on order, I always recommend we do a best practice session. So take about an hour and a half with your lines of business and your leadership team to figure out, okay, why are we doing it? What do you got to change within the store, planning for self-checkout? What's the impact on labor, impact on operations, give you training material, kind of teach you everything you ever wanted to know with self-checkout. We'll help you with the layouts. And then we'll really talk about, how do you really improve that shopping experience in your store by providing self-checkout? And those are some of the most important things there. So with that, I see you're posting a question up there, Angel. I'll let people respond to that. The next thing is questions, Q&A time. So I'll come off video and ask if there is any questions anybody might have. Angel, I'll turn it over to you. I don't know if there's any questions in the chat.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was having trouble with my camera. Yes, we have a few questions. So the first one I believe you answered is if I'm interested in implementing self-checkout in my store, what are the next steps you recommend I take?
Yep. Definitely following up with STCR. And, the first thing we really want to do is, find out, okay, what are you trying to solve for, right? Are you getting slammed on the front end? Do you need more express lanes? Are you just trying to give your shoppers a choice? I always like to say, and I'd love to hear from you, if you move forward with self-checkout, if you do it right and you do a good job, you're going to stand back and you're actually going to see a line at self-checkout and you won't see a line at your traditional point of sale lane. Because you're going to quickly realize that, some shoppers just prefer to use self-checkout than a regular lane. And by you giving them a choice, you're giving them that option. So you're improving customer satisfaction for that individual customer. And you know what? There's always going to be negative customers that come into your store and don't like self-checkout. Well, guess what? They don't have to use them. They can use the regular lane if they choose to. So you're giving them that choice, and that's probably the most important thing. But yeah, STCR will definitely help you with the logic behind that and pull me in when necessary.
And I know you mentioned this too, but someone asked why the media is saying self-checkout is dead. Additionally, why Walmart and other big stores are removing their self-checkouts.
Yeah, so we know for a fact they're not removing them, right? They've spent too much money to remove them. They're retooling what they've done. Think about it, right? What sells magazines? Negative news. So, you hear a little bit of negativity and it's going to be plastered everywhere. They are not pulling out self-checkouts. Now they may be pulling out self-checkouts in certain locations. So if you think about what happened, right? When COVID hit, people were afraid to touch money. People were afraid to go talk to a cashier, right? So all these retailers went out and spent a lot of money on implementing self-checkout. Some of them went way too far and they really thought they knew what they were doing. And that's why they went to, let's say, 80% self-checkout. Well, if you ever go, and I don't mean to pick on Walmart, I understand they have a business to run. And, in Canada, they use all of our self-checkouts, and in the UK, they do the same thing. But the interesting thing is when you go into a Walmart, they slam about 14 self-checkouts on both ends of the front end. They put maybe one shopper assistant there to manage those 14 self-checkouts, and many of them are cash acceptors. There's no way one shopper assistant can physically manage 14 self-checkouts. We always say 1 to 6 is the max you want to do. So basically they did, a lot of retailers did a very poor job of implementing self-service. They didn't have the right staffing. They didn't put procedures in place to reduce shrink like I've talked about here, and that I talk more about when it comes to best practices. So yeah, your shrink's going to go up. So as a retailer, if your shrink goes up, you're probably going to remove the technology that caused it. But if you remember the comment I said, if you do self-checkout right, your shrink will go down in your store. That's a fact, because at the end of the day, we all know, and you know better than anybody, that employees steal more than the shoplifters do. So by removing a cashier doing sweethearting, because there is no wait security at the regular point of sale lane, right? There's none of that. When you implement self-checkout, if you do it right, you're going to have less shrink. So I'll give you a quick story. I have a very large chain. If I said who they were, you know who they are. They wanted to implement self-checkout, and they're pretty high-end stores, right? They didn't want to implement self-checkout for years, and they called me up one day and they said, Paul, you know what? We want to do self-checkout. I'm like, well, what's changed? They said, well, our customers are asking for it. I'm like, okay, great. You finally saw the light, right? So I invited them to Raleigh. We did a briefing. They decided to do self-checkout in 3 or 4 stores. I get a call from them, right? And keep in mind, I did best practice training with them and I explained to them the right way to do it. I get a call from them saying, you know what? We're no longer going to roll out self-checkouts in all your stores. And I'm like, why? They said, because your shrink went through the roof. I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Are you following best practices? Oh, yeah, we're doing that. So I decided to take a drive to the store. It's about 2 hours from me. And I go into the store and they installed 4 self-checkouts right in front of the exit doors, which is a #1 no-no. They didn't have any shopper assistant assigned to the lanes. And I asked the lady that was there, I'm like, well, who's watching the lanes? She goes, well, it's hard to watch them when my back's towards them. I'm like, what are you talking about? She goes, well, I'm the cashier at this lane and I can't see them. I'm like, okay, so you have no shopper assistant assigned. I'm like, okay, strike #2. And then I go up to the lane and they have it in shopper speed mode. And if you remember what shopper speed mode was, they had all security turned off. So it didn't know the weight of any item. So I showed the IT director, I'm like, look, I can buy 1 and get 10 free just by having no security. So I found it kind of amusing that the retailer has flushed their entire self-checkout implementation because of high shrink when they really caused it, right? By not implementing the necessary steps to get, the great throughput and that put their shrink to bed on that. So yeah, that's why it's in the news, because retailers really making mistakes on how they've implemented it. Not that people have changed, the retailer has changed on what they're doing. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, and we have quite a few more questions. So
Yeah.
the next the next one is NCR self-checkout better than Toshiba self-checkout?
Is it better? I wouldn't say it's better. It's a good self-checkout. There's no question, right? NCR's been around for quite some time. They do a great job with it. I think their philosophy behind self-checkout is very different than ours. So again, they make a good self-checkout, don't get me wrong. But if you remember the example I talked to you about with Albertsons, how they implemented self-checkout in 2011 and ripped them all out. Those were all NCR self-checkouts. And then they went and reinstalled Toshiba self-checkouts. A lot of it has to do with the implementation of the self-checkout. So if you remember that podium I showed you, one thing about the NCR solution is they call it the wrap station. So they have a screen on the podium, split into 4, split into 6, and they have a shopper assistant, holding up the podium, clearing interventions remotely, never even walking over to the lane to help the shopper get through the intervention and to educate the shopper what they did wrong. So their whole implementation of self-checkout is very different than ours. The technology is different. For example, they don't use common point of sale parts the way we do. Now they do some things better than us and we do things better than them. So yeah, it's a good solution. Would I say it's better than ours? No, I think our software is definitely superior. If you look at any of the stats, it'll show that our intervention rate, as far as how often you get stuck, is less than 10%, and NCR runs at about 30%. So again, they're both good technologies. We're both going in the same direction, but I think if you look at some of the security features that we've added to ours with the Alera security suite, it definitely surpasses what our competitors are doing.
The next question we have is, can the produce recognition identify produce items that are in plastic bags?
Yes. So back to that video that we showed, yeah, it'll recognize them in the regular plastic bags that the grocer has, and it'll also recognize them in reusable bags, right? And the neat thing about Produce Rec is it perfect? Absolutely not, right? What is our goal? Our goal is to limit the number of items on the screen for the shopper to pick from. So it gets smarter as things go on. So in your store, right, your lighting is different than the other stores. Your produce set is different, right? If you go into an Asian market, they got a lot of produce that we don't recognize today. But once we get 10 good scans of a produce item, whether it's in a bag or out of a bag, that's when we feed the model and we add it to the model. So the next time we update the model database that gets downloaded into that camera, it's going to recognize it. So the more it's used, the smarter it gets. And that's just the way AI technology works with the machine learning. So yeah, it definitely works with bags.
That's cool. I didn't know that myself. So
Yep.
that was a good question. Next one is, how many self-checkouts do you recommend for a small/medium-sized store?
Well, that depends. Never go under 4. If you go under 4, don't buy self-checkout, because you're going to fail miserably, because what you're going to do is you're not going to assign a shopper assistant, and you're going to have your service counter or the lane next door try to manage it, and you're going to fail and shrink's going to go through the roof. So you never do less than 4. Now, once we do a survey of your front end to figure out, okay, how many POS lanes do you have? Where are your merchandise racks? Where's your exit doors? Where's your entry doors? Where's your service counter? Once we have that information, we can plop on a grid and we'll design it for you. And we'll say, okay, based on the layout, you're going to need to remove, 2 POS lanes. You're going to need to remove this merchandise rack. And these are the model self-checkouts you'll be able to fit in there, right? There's always ways to fit in self-checkouts. But again, how much space do you have and what are you trying to solve for? Again, are you looking for express or are you looking for large orders? I'm an old school guy. I like express lanes. I think when you're going to have a shopper go through there with 50 items, you're looking for trouble. If you have a shopper going through there with express, 10 to 20 items, you're fine, right? So again, why do people use self-checkout? Get in and get out quickly, right? So yeah, we can definitely help you with that configuration, but nothing less than 4, nothing more than half, right? Never go more than half. And that's the mistake a lot of these people did. And that's why their shrink went up. They went to 80% self-checkout, which is a mistake because now you're removing the choice for the shopper.
I will get with the person too afterwards. We can discuss. The next question I have is, do you provide remote attendant stations for the shopper assistant?
We do. You can get a podium. I say if you're going to go for a podium, and it's funny because every NCR customer we convert to Toshiba, they have a ball and chain tied to the podium. They got to have the podium, which I get it, right? It's hard to change. So if you want to go with the podium, I always recommend putting it off to the side. You don't want anybody standing behind it. You're going to put a regular point of sale lane there because our solution doesn't require the podium. You'll put a regular point of sale lane there to handle any exceptions. So let's say you decide to go with card only machines and a shopper doesn't read your signs and they want to pay cash, you're going to have to transfer that order from the self-checkout to the POS lane. You can handle it there. Maybe the lane has an error. You want to transfer the order to the POS lane. So yeah, you could put a podium there. You can use the mobile, or it's called mobile assist now, which is really either a handheld device or a tablet where you can actually, manage that lane remotely. Again, the only use case I see for that is your shopper assistant didn't come in, you didn't staff it correctly, and you want to keep those lanes open because you're busy, and you can clear those interventions as if you were standing in front of the lane. Unfortunately, the shopper doesn't know what you did to clear it, but you got them off, off and running on their way, right? So those are some of the options there.
The next question is, will you share the presentation document? Yes, I will send that to you directly after this webinar.
Of course, yep.
And then,
yeah, like I said,
go ahead.
This is only the tip of the iceberg, right? If you want to dig deeper on any topic within the presentation, you want to learn more about the new AI Alera security suite, we can set up individual calls with your team to take them through all that, right? So that's not a problem. Sorry, Angel.
Sorry. The next one is how many how many self-checkouts can one attendant manage? Your recommendation?
Yeah, up to 6, right? I wouldn't go past 6. Once you get beyond 6, remember, right? The role and responsibility of the shopper assistant is to greet every shopper, right? That's part of your loss prevention, right? You're making eye contact with the shopper. You're talking to the shopper. The chances of that shopper stealing from you at the self-checkout are slim to none, right? So you want them talking to the shopper. You want them managing the queues. What do we mean by that? Well, you know what? When you have lines forming at the POS lanes next door, that shopper assistant should be inviting shoppers to use the self-checkout. They should be holding their hand if they've never used it. Remove some of the fear that the shopper may have. Maybe they got stuck at the grocer down the road and they don't want to use yours. You got to explain to them that yours is different, right? So, again, that shopper assistant is your customer service rep to your shoppers. So if you want to shortchange that role, you can do that, but you're not going to like your results. So again, 1 to 6 is max. You want to stretch it to 8. If you have cash only, you can try, or card only, you can try that, but it's not recommended.
Yeah, my grandmother, I had to, she would never use a self-checkout. She refused. And I
I get
finally
it.
got her to do it, and I showed her how to do it, and she's like, "This is so easy." And I'm like,
Yeah,
"I told you, Grandma, like it's okay, like we can do this."
exactly.
So
Well, my father's in his 80s. He likes to use self-checkout. I'm like, yeah, why do you use it? He goes, Paul, because I can see what the price of every product is as I scan it, because I don't trust what's ringing up in the register. I'm like, yeah, you're right. And that's people use it for different reasons, right? You just got to talk to your customers and see. That's all.
yeah,
And
she's like,
remove the
"This is
fear.
easy. I don't have to wait in a line." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, see."
Mhm.
So I think that might be our last question. Thank you so much, Paul. You did an amazing job.
Thank you.
Um, there's a couple things I want to mention. So the first thing is next month we'll have our next installment of the self-checkout monthly master series. That'll be June 6th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. And the topic will be going over self-checkout best practices. We also have later this month our famously popular Lunch and Learn. That is on Thursday, May 30th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. This will focus on alternative incentive programs. If you have any questions about either one of these or need more information or a link, email sales@stcr.com. And thank you all for joining us today, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.